It's really good to be with you. I'm Pastor Phil, for those of you who may not know, and the guys are off, but we also are missing a couple of, 4 of our teenagers who are in Ontario right now, which is kind of cool, and we're excited for the future and possibility of them starting Bible school. How many think it's good that we have 4 kids interested in going to Bible school next year? I mean, that's pretty good. Yeah? Yeah, in Dakota, huh? Yeah, she's like, yeah. Her little sister says, and my brother, I can't believe it. Well, God is good, and he is really a great God. It's a pleasure to be back with you guys. I am the first time preaching here at Community of Hope as no longer your pastor. That's kind of a neat deal. You guys are without me anymore, which is probably much better for you. But I miss you guys, and it's good to be back this morning. And I'm thankful that we have a wonderful relationship as we continue to see how that relationship forms and goes. My job is expanding in what I'm doing in the United States and in Canada to see new churches get started and also get restarted and revitalizing churches. I just came back from what's called a boot camp, and we had 7 projects there, and it was really cool. We had some churches that were older and kind of dying that needed to be revitalized, that were there to help think through a plan and pray together about how they could do that. We had churches that were getting ready to get started in places they didn't even know where. They knew they were going to be in Baltimore somewhere. They don't even know what place, where they're going to be yet, but they had a team of 7 people going, we want to start a new church in Baltimore. And that was really fun. And we had another group of guys that were there. They were from 3 different churches, and they were from 3 different groups of denominations. And they wanted to work as one church together and become one church. And so they were working through a very difficult and arduous process of all the traditions and things that they do differently. And can we work together? Can we be one church in 3 locations? And they decided on Saturday morning after we finished the boot camp that they were going to work together and do that. And so God is at work doing a lot of cool different things, and we just get to be a part of it. We get to be a part of what he's doing, and I'm thankful to hear what God is doing here at Community of Hope. I mean, to think that we have 240 kids potentially coming here on next Saturday, that's pretty exciting, isn't it? Who's nervous? Great. You know, when it's overwhelming, it means you can't do it. That means God has to. And what's cool is if we join him, we get to be part of that. And so I would encourage you, don't sit on the sidelines. Even if you hate kids or Easter eggs, there's something you can do in the kitchen or hide somewhere, but there's something that needs to be done that you can do on Saturday morning. So just come and be a part of it and hang out and watch God do some cool things. And if you're a high people person, you probably know that about me, you know, it's great to connect with people. There's a lot of people in our community who seem like they have it all together. They have stuff, they have resources, they have good jobs, but they don't have hope. And they don't have community. And we might be poor, some of us might not have a lot of resources, but you know, we have a lot of hope, and we've got a lot of community here, and we can share that with them because of Christ. So I just want to encourage you to take part and be part of that. Certainly be praying this week what God wants to do, and don't let it stop you from inviting your friend, your family member, and your neighbor, because they need Jesus too. So it's really good to be here. We're starting a new series this morning. It's called Rescue. It's called Rescue, and kind of thinking through the reality that it's coming up to this big thing called Easter. Anyone heard of it? Yeah, heard of Easter before. And there's this reality that what is this all about, and how does it all play out? And one of the big themes that we see is that Jesus has come, he says, to seek and to save that which was lost. He's come to rescue us. And so we've got to think about what does that mean, and how does that play out, and how does Jesus go about doing that? I think in my own life, I think about the realities that there are a lot of things in my life that I need to be rescued from. Anybody have things that need to be rescued from? The thing I come to the conclusion that I keep coming back to is I need to mostly be rescued from myself. You know, I've met the enemy, and it's me. Right? I keep looking at him in the mirror in the morning when I wake up. There's a reality that we need to be rescued, and sometimes there are things in our life that are really, really overwhelming, and they're hard. Maybe we lost our job, and we're trying to figure out how to make our way forward. Maybe there are financial situations in crisis. I know for my wife and I, we put ourselves in some difficult places sometimes by our own bad decisions. And it puts us in a very difficult place, and we need to be rescued. I know that there are things in my life that often happen, and I go, my word. Or there are things that happen to us that we had no control over. A friend passes away or gets a very serious illness, or something happens, and we ask God, where are you? What's going on? How do I get through this? We need to be rescued. Rescue is on lots of different levels. And I think one of the things that we want to know is that Jesus has come to rescue us, to save us, and save us from lots of different things. And this morning we want to kind of dig in and kind of bring ourselves up to speed with Jesus just before he enters what we call the Passion Week, just before he starts what we call Palm Sunday, where he introduces himself as King. And everyone starts to bow down and give him palm branches on one day, and not a few more days later, they're crying out, "Crucify him," and they're going to kill him. And many of you know that. And what leads up to that point, what brings us to that point is Jesus now has been on the earth for about 2.5 years out after as an adult doing ministry. So he got baptized, and then for 2.5 years he starts to gain disciples. He starts teaching people that he's going to be killed and he's going to rise again. And absolutely nobody hears him and understands that he's saying that. Because as he's telling them that, he's walking on water. He's healing the sick. He's casting out demons. He's taking fish and bread and multiplying it so that one little grouping of stuff can feed 5,000 people. Jesus is doing these incredible miracles at the same time telling them that I am going to go and I'm going to die. I'm going to die and I'm going to rise again. And they're all going, because they're looking at Jesus going, no one can do what he's doing. And to put this in a little bit of a context, the Jews had been waiting for what they called the Messiah, this Christ. The Greek word was Christ, the Hebrew word was Messiah. And so this one who's going to come, the sent one, the anointed one, who's going to come and rescue them. And they thought it's going to be this physical rescue, is going to take them away from the Romans, who are now under the thumb of the Romans, and they're going to be free, and now they're going to be the lords of the earth. And Jesus is trying to tell them that it's not going to be quite like that. It's not going to look like that. And in fact, we find Jesus in John chapter 10, he is now confronting the people who are called the Jews in the book of John, the Gospel of John. The writer John likes to refer to the group of people who are Jewish, who are kind of against Jesus. He calls them the Jews. He just uses that term, the Jews, to kind of make this statement about this group of people. And they're angry with Jesus because Jesus would even dare to call himself God. Yet they couldn't refute the fact that he raised people from the dead. They couldn't refute the fact that he healed people, that he cast out demons, and that he made boats go from one part of the lake to the other side immediately. He walked on water. He did things that only God could do. But they didn't want to hear that. They couldn't believe that. They see him as blasphemous. In fact, they took up stones in John chapter 10, and they were going to kill Jesus. This is now nearing the end of his ministry. When we pick up the story in John chapter 11, if you have your Bibles, you can follow along with me in John chapter 11. Many of you know this story very well. It's one of my favorite passages of Scripture because there's so many pieces in it. And what I love about the Bible is God often puts people in it. You laugh at me. Well, sometimes we have these deep theological conversations and we go, what does it mean? But when you see people, then what can we do when we see people? We relate, don't we? We relate to the people, and we go, oh, I'm kind of like that person, or I'm kind of like that person. And then how did they respond? And maybe I shouldn't respond that way. Or, it's nice that God puts people there. I'm glad he didn't put me in there because there'll be a lot of bad stuff, and you don't want to see all that. But I'm just really glad that he puts people in the Bible that we can see. So I made your notes kind of vague this morning so that you can kind of write your own thoughts down. Okay, so I've given you a little bit of background of Jesus now is entering, he's getting ready to go into what we call the Passion Week. And in between getting to the Passion Week, now he's going to take his disciples and move them over to Jerusalem. And the last time he was in Judea, what were they trying to do to him and his disciples? They were trying to kill them with stones, okay? Now that's important to recognize. And in John chapter 11, we find three groups of people, okay? We find his disciples. And these are his followers. These are the ones who've been following him really since the beginning of his earthly ministry, about 2.5 years before this. And they're his followers. And then there are people that Jesus meets along the way who are really nice, and he falls in love with, they care deeply for him, and they're his friends. And there are people like that who believe in him, but aren't like leaving everything and following him around the countryside, but they still believe in him. They're his friends. And then there are people, because I wanted to use the F's, friends, followers. So I said his foes. Okay, so put up with that word with me, please, just kind of, So then there are his foes. There are people who are been antagonistically against him. And we think about this in our own world today. There are people who follow Jesus. There are people who are they like Jesus. And there are people who don't really want much to do with Jesus. Does that kind of sound like our world today? So really the world hasn't changed too much as we think about these three different groups of people. And we want to observe them a little bit. We want to talk about the idea of rescue, and I'm saying that we need to be rescued by faith. By faith, we're going to be rescued from the things that are in our world. And so we're going to look now at the faith of the followers, the faith of the friends, and faith of the foes. In John 11, you find the disciples were kind of getting excited. They had been ready to go for Jesus to take over the world, and now Jesus has been saying, no, I'm going to die, and they just didn't want to listen to it. In fact, Jesus tells Peter, when Peter says, no, God forbid that you would die, and Jesus says to Peter, what? Get behind me, Satan. In other words, Peter's words were not from God. They were from someone else, and that wasn't the right thinking. And so the disciples are a little fearful now. They just almost got killed by stones. They don't quite get that Jesus is going to die. Jesus is trying to set them up. And in John 11:4, Jesus says this. He says to them in John 11:4, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And so in the story, we have this guy named Lazarus, who is Mary and Martha's brother, and he's going to end up passing away and dying. But while he's sick, his sisters send word to Jesus and say, Jesus, would you come and rescue, would you come and heal my brother? And Jesus waits 2 days and he doesn't come. And then later on, he says to the disciples, okay, now it's time, let's go. And when they get there, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days because, they didn't have like jet planes and stuff like that. He walked from one part of town of Israel to the other part of Israel. And he gets there, and Martha comes out and calls him bad names. And Mary comes out and says, what are you doing? The Jews say, what are you doing? And we find now Jesus ends up having to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now that's the short part of the story. But in the midst of this story, what's going on with the faith of those that are there? So we find the disciples, Jesus tells his disciples, once they find word that Lazarus is not doing well, he says, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory. Can you say that with me? It's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Glorification. What is glorification? What I believe God is saying here is everyone will know that Jesus is God. So here's my definition. Ready? This is a really great definition of glorification. When God is done doing what God is going to do, everyone will know that God did it. Isn't that brilliant? Come on, tell me. I had to pick the biggest words I knew and put them in this definition. It's unbelievable. You could tell my master's degree was right at work in this thing. We have these big theological words that sometimes we can't figure out how to pin them in a way that we can actually understand them. We know they have meaning, but we just don't know how to get the meaning to us. And I believe this kind of gets at the meaning of what it means to be glorified. This idea that when God is going to do whatever it is he's going to do, that when he's done doing that, the only thing you can say is God did it. Have you ever been in a place where you know that only God could do it? That's when he's glorifying himself. That's when he brings glory. And so we see this power that God has to do. Now, we see the disciples, these guys we're calling the followers, and they had some concern. That Jesus says, let's go to Lazarus, who was in Bethany, which is in the province of Judea, which is right next to Jerusalem, where Jesus was almost killed by people stoning him. So the disciples are full of fear, and they're concerned. And of course, when we're full of fear and concern, we listen really well. And we interpret what others tell us with just a pure conscience and a deep thought about what they're saying. Have you ever misinterpreted somebody because you weren't really listening and you were afraid of your own concern? Does anyone, just raise your hand, because I know that I get in my head something, and I really think, this is the naive part of me, I think I'm listening. I'm going, yes, words are going in my head, screaming out my ears, but they're going in, and I think I'm listening, but my fear, my concern is blocking my ability to think. blocking my ability to see, and I'm not hearing properly. We ask, what can be rescued from? How about rescued from our fear? And so the disciples are so afraid. They're not listening to Jesus, and they're not really wanting to do what Jesus wants them to do. So it says in John 11, verse 8, "But Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you." Of course, they were worried about him, right? The Jews were trying to stone you. Of course, we were all around you, and they could have killed us too, but that was just, that's not really what our concern is. Of course, it's you, Rabbi, we're concerned about. Yet you are going back there. That's what they're concerned about. So my translation is they're saying, hey, we're going to Jerusalem to get stoned. Part of the hippie movement. No, it's not. So this is the reality of the disciples. Were so bound in their fear and so caught up that they're not hearing what Jesus had to say. And so we have the friends of Jesus. This is Mary and Martha. And we know that they are really good friends with Jesus. Let's just observe verses, John 11, 1 through 6, and then some of the other verses. But John 11, 1 says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha." Verse 2, look what it says. "This Mary," in parentheses, "whose brother Lazarus now is sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair." Now, why does the writer John give us that information? Why does the writer John remind us of the lady who came to Jesus broken because of her own sin, because of her difficult place? She had come to Jesus and she took very expensive ointment and she broke it and she put it over his feet and she cried over his feet with her own tears and washed his feet with her hair. How many think that's dramatic? I'm a dramatic person. That's pretty dramatic, okay? That's even more dramatic. Well, of course, I don't have any hair, but that's more dramatic than me. Okay, this lady, what does that tell you about the relationship and the care that was between these two people? Like, that's the point of what the writer's getting at. That's why he inserts this thought in the text. So we can think about, who is this Mary? Oh, this is the one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus. Look what he says. Can you read this with me? "Lord, the one you love is sick." What does that tell us about the relationship between Jesus and Lazarus? The writer, John, is trying to help us understand that there's a deep, abiding friendship between Lazarus, Mary and Martha, and Jesus. This is very intentional by the writer. He's helping us to see that. And so when we think about this, but Mary and Martha have just lost their brother, and so the sisters sent word to the Lord, "Lord, the one you love is sick." And now Jesus loved Mary and Martha and her sister Lazarus. Just in case we didn't get it, verse 5, what does it say? Jesus loved Mary and Martha. Okay, that's important. So we find this interesting thing. Jesus has waited 2 days before he travels, which takes another 2 days. So when he gets finally to where they are, it's been 4 days, and Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Now let's just get some things straight, first of all. Had Jesus healed anybody before Lazarus? Yes, many people. Had Jesus healed people from afar when he wasn't even there? Answer, yes. Had Jesus raised people from the dead before Lazarus? Answer, yes. So Jesus had healed people, he had raised people from the dead, and he had done it from afar. Now, Mary and Martha, their brother had passed away, and that's real and that's sad. I'm not trying to minimize that. But here's Jesus, who has done all the things that they want before, has come now, and their brother, who they want to see alive, is now dead, and they're very deeply grieving, and rightfully so. But now look what happens. Now, this is Martha's response. Here comes Martha. Jesus is just outside of town, and she comes hearing that Jesus is coming into town. She runs out to see him. And what does she say? "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." What is she really saying? Jesus, can you say it with me? It's all your fault. Come on, stop trying to pretend you don't say that. Let's say it together. Ready? Jesus, it's all your fault. How many of you have said that to Jesus or God at least once in your life? The rest of you are liars, okay? The truth is, we do this. We do this. What is Jesus trying to rescue us from? Our false beliefs, our misunderstanding of him, and our false perspective of our own importance. Because God is often at work doing things, not that he doesn't care about us, but he also cares about everybody else around us. In fact, if you're going to weigh out you or 1,000 other people, what's more important? Do some math here. Okay, both and is true. God has me. But what about the rest of the people around me? And so we often get ourselves confused. And when we are stuck in our frustration, our expectation of God was X. He's going to do these 3 things. And we think he must do those things. In fact, if God is my friend and Jesus is my friend, I cried over his feet, I washed his feet with my hair and my tears, and I gave this expensive oil. Certainly Jesus is going to do it my way, right? Because if God really loves me, he's going to do what I want. How many know that's not true? How many of us believe that? Isn't it weird how we know it's not true, but we believe it at the same time? Like, we are the most conflicted people I've ever met. Actually, we're all very normal, aren't we? Every human being on the face of earth. We see things from our perspective, and we want God to answer us the way we want him to answer us. And when he doesn't answer us the way we want him to answer us, we become disillusioned, we become angry, we become frustrated, and we run out like Martha to meet Jesus because we hear he's coming, and we look at him and say, Jesus, ready? It's all your fault. Martha isn't so different than us, I don't think. Dealing with her own pain, the reality of the loss of her brother, and she's like, Jesus, you healed other people. Why couldn't you heal him? Right? Why couldn't you do it for... You say you love me. How come you did this to me? And so we find that Mary's concern was, her brother's dead, and her other concern is, where are you, God? Right? That's her concern. Look at Mary. There's a lot of other story I could tell here. We could spend 3 or 4 hours just on this text. It's such an amazing story. Take some time to go back and read it again and again. There's lots of nuance here. But Mary, Martha's like me. You messed with me, I'm going to go talk to you about it, okay? Mary is, you messed with me, I'm going to go sulk in the corner and have a pity party, okay? So you have 2 different people. I mean, which one's more right? Can we just say neither? Okay? But everyone responds differently. So Martha's like, Jesus, I'm going to get you. Mary's like, oh, I didn't care about me. It was my corner. And so Martha has to go to say to Mary, I love this. Look, reading the text there. Martha has to go to say to Mary, Mary, the master is calling for you and wants to speak to you. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just not that way at all, so I don't process that. But this is so funny. To me, he deals with Martha, who just came at him like this, and now he deals with Mary. And Mary's response is, once she sees Jesus, she says, what? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So Mary says, Jesus, it's all your fault. And Mary's concern is, of course, her brother. Her brother's dead. And that's not good. And she's asking, where are you, God? Right? These are her concerns. And they're legitimate concerns, and they're real. When we think about now the foes, what are the faith of the foes? These are the people who are called, ready? The Jews. Ready? Come on, work with me here. The Jews, okay? This is what the writer John does. He just, for some reason, he uses this phrase, and he kind of clumps this group of people who are Jewish, supposed to follow God, know the Word of God, but yet they don't like Jesus. In fact, they want to kill him. And they're trying to find ways not to believe in Jesus. And so this group of people are trying to keep with their historical faith, and now they're being messed with because the Messiah has come, but they're not willing to accept him. And so there's a real problem here. There's a conflict here. And so the Jews, they're sitting there, and here comes Jesus. Jesus is coming into town. Now, he's healed other people. He's raised other people from the dead. And now they know that Jesus is good friends with Lazarus and with Mary and Martha. And what's the deal? What do they say? Jesus, it's all your fault. Go back and look at the text. You'll find that they'll say, isn't this one who raised other people from the dead, couldn't have he healed this guy too? Like, why didn't he do this? It's all your fault. And one of the things how many of you are student type people, kind of, like people like to figure things out? I want to give you a little challenge for those of you who like to figure things out. Every time the Jews make an observation in the Gospel of John, they are logically correct, but they are always wrong. Every single time. So, for instance, Mary goes to see Jesus in this text, right? She goes to see Jesus, and they say, oh, she's going to go to the tomb to weep there. No, she's going to go see Jesus. Now, was it a wrong, crazy assumption that she was going to go to the tomb? No. But that's important because we're going to see something later on how that plays out. Now, so we have here the faith of the followers, right? We're going to go get to Jerusalem to get stoned. Are they believing Jesus? No. Faith of the friends, Jesus, it's all your fault. How's that going? Pretty good. And faith of the foes, Jesus, it's all your fault. It's good so far, right? This is all working out. So what's Jesus' response to all this? Jesus' response here in verse 33, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit, and he was troubled. Now, a lot of my good friends interpret this passage wrong. It's fun. I had to say that. They, and I've been taught this my whole life, that Jesus had compassion because people were sad about the death of Lazarus. Now, that makes logical sense from one perspective. But what did Jesus tell his disciples was going to happen before he got there? He told his disciples that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He told his disciples, I am doing this so that people might know that I am the Son of God and put their faith in me. And the people he's just spent 2.5 years with, both those who are his followers and those who are his friends, are they placing their faith in him? Are they doubting him? Are they questioning him right now? And as he starts to move towards trying to help Lazarus raise from the dead, what are the people doing? Are they placing their faith in him that he'd do something? Or are they doubting and they're angry at him? Jesus is weeping because there's deep unbelief all around him. And even though he's poured out his life and given his life for these people for the last 2.5 years, they have continued to doubt him. Now, how many of us would admit that we've been Christians for more than 2.5 years? And how many of us would be willing to admit that we have had moments when we still doubt him? I'm not criticizing the disciples or Mary and Martha. I'm suggesting God put them in the Bible so that we could see them and find ourselves. And I think that's a good thing. We get ourselves too perfected. We have this expectation of perfection in ourselves that it's not the same expectation that God has. That's why Jesus came. Do you know that? He came and he died on the cross because I'm a sinner. And so are you. And we need his forgiveness, and we need his help. Not just once, we need it every day, and sometimes hundreds and sometimes thousands of times a day. Can we all agree on that, church? And so as we recognize this, we see then that Mary and Martha are really struggling to believe God, that the disciples are really struggling to believe God, and certainly the Jews already are predisposed not to believe God, and Jesus is sitting there at this crucifix. He's ready to show them and display that he's going to rise from the dead. He's going to prove he has power over sin and death because he's going to do it with his friend, and that's going to set them up for the next week. Right? This is all set up. This is all trying to help them get ready, and no one's following the script. No one's listened to what he said. No one's heard what he's been talking about. No one's believing what he's doing, and he's going, what the blazes is going on around here? It's hard. And Jesus responds. He says in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. In fact, it says in John 11:35, Jesus wept. Later on, you find just a few verses later, when he gets ready to go over towards the tomb, and they start questioning why he's going to open up the grave. Why would you go near that dead body? Why would you go towards that thing that's stinky? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. This depth of stirring is this real difficulty that Jesus has with the lack of belief from those he's invested his life in. See, here's Jesus' purpose for this whole thing, right? Jesus' purpose is found in verse 4 of 11. We talked about, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for, say it with me, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus reinstates his purpose later on with the disciples in John 11, verses 14 and 15. And so he said to them plainly, Lazarus, say it with me, is dead. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there so that you may believe. What is he doing? Why is he doing it? He wants people to believe. God wants to rescue you. God is going to do all the work to rescue you. But the one work he will not do is he will not give you the faith to believe. You must believe him. He's going to do what is around you. He's going to make all things possible to accomplish it. But you have to believe. That's your job. It's not work. Well, depends on how you look at it. But it's not a work. I don't physically do something. I have to choose to believe he's right and he's good and he's just and he's loving and he's caring for me and his ways are better. And Jesus is the Son of God, and I need to believe these things. And Jesus is doing all of these things so that you might believe. He restates that in John 11. He tells us this right there in verse 40. After he raises Lazarus from the dead, look what it says. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Jesus is reiterating why I'm doing all of this. Why did this whole thing of Lazarus come down? Because I want people to believe in who I am. See, Jesus answers all of their concerns. Look, he says in John 11, verses 9 through 10, when the disciples are just grappling over the fact that Jesus says, we're going to go back to Judea, we're going to go to Bethany, we're going to go see Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and the disciples are like, whoa, slow the train down. That's in Judea. That's where we were just going to get stoned. I don't want to be killed. I don't want any part of that. Jesus, if he's sick, then let him go ahead and get healed, and he can get healed far away. We don't have to go to him, right? He'll get better. It'll be all good. And Jesus is like, I am the light of the world. Whoever believes in me will be safe. Whoever walks in the light will be safe. Look what he says here in John 11, verses 9 and 10. He says, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. My friend, if you're all bound up in fear, and you're all can't get past what your issue is, and it's real. Maybe your finances are killing you. Maybe your relationship with your husband or spouse or a family member is really difficult. Maybe you've got a disease that's not going to go well, and it's a lot of pain and there's difficulty. I'm not minimizing what difficulty you're managing, your fear that you're dealing with. I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm trying to say to you that Jesus is giving you an answer. He's saying, I am the light of the world. When you walk with me, you don't have to be afraid you're going to stumble because I am the light. But if you don't walk with me, you're walking in darkness and you will stumble, and you have lots of reason to be afraid. Jesus' point to his disciples in John 11 is that he's the light of the world. When Martha was talking to Jesus, Jesus said to Martha, he says, your brother will rise again. And she's like, well, I know one day, someday in the future, God's going to do some cool stuff. And Jesus says to her in John 11, verse 25 to 26, he says, I am, can you say this with me? I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Jesus' response. Jesus answers the concern. They were afraid about Lazarus' death. They were afraid for what was happening. They were afraid that God didn't love them. They were wondering where God was. And Jesus says, I am, presently. Not just one day in the future, the resurrection. I am currently the resurrection, and I will help you from this. And then, of course, Jesus physically demonstrates he answers all of their concerns. What does he do? He doesn't just tell them stuff. He raises Lazarus from the dead. We see this now in John 11, down by, I think, verse 26 or 20, no, yeah. What is it now? My brain will, for some reason, not there, but it's all right. It says this, so they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. And I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here. So Jesus is having an outward prayer to God because he needs to do that. Or we need him to do that. He's helping us to know how to believe in him. And he says, I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe. This is the issue, that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out. His hands and feet were bound with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes. Let him go." How many think he answered their concern? he exclamation mark, answered their concern. Jesus is the resurrection and the light. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the one who rescues us from our unbelief. He's the one who rescues us from our fear. He's the one who rescues us from our false beliefs. He's going to help you, but we need to place our faith in him. And their response was this in John 11, verse 45 through 46. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary had seen what Jesus did and believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. They went away and said, "Tattle, tattle, Jesus is causing trouble over there. We don't want to place our faith in him. He does stuff no one else could do, like raise people from the dead, but we need to get him out of here because he's causing trouble." Band, you're welcome to come. My question to you this morning is, where are you in the story? The theme of our series is rescue, and we're getting ready to talk about the greatest rescue of all humankind. And Pastor Isaac will be giving the next two messages referring back to what's going on in Jesus' coming and to the Easter and all of that. But today we see kind of a precursor of what's going on. Jesus is trying to show people that he is the resurrection, that he is the life, that he's the light of the world, that you can place your faith in him. And his response to our fear, his response to our concerns, he meets every single one of them. And this morning I just encourage you, have you placed your faith in Jesus Christ? Are you trusting fully in him? He says, if you walk in the light as I am the light, you will not stumble.